Hey there, Dave Paulides, Canine Missing Project. Another one for our YouTube page. I want to tell you that I'm here in front of Old Glory today for a couple of reasons. First of all, something I think we live in the greatest nation in the world. Our forefathers set down standards and amendments that have lived for almost 250 years. They used great insight to set those down. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to gather. They live today. I believe in those rights. I also believe in a big one called freedom of privacy. You have a right not to have your private life looked at unless you're committing a crime. Now, our government has started for years now looking at our texts, phone messages, listening to our phones, all in the name of terrorism. Well, a federal court within the last year has ruled that that was all unconstitutional. But have you heard our government say that they're going to stop doing that? I haven't. And if it wasn't for Edward Snowden telling us that this was going on, we'd never know. Now let's talk about the Fisa Warrant for a minute. Fisa Warrant, a special warrant issued by the Fisa court for our government to snoop on people. And it's supposed to have barriers in it against unlawful intrusion. But that has been violated over 100 times. And that's public information at this point. Namely, our FBI has violated that. And no one's looking over their shoulder. You haven't heard anyone being indicted for perjury. Very, very frustrating. Now, who owns our national park property? Who owns the land belonging to the BLM or the U.S. Forest Service? We do. Americans. We own that land and we hire people to manage it. Now, what they're doing is they're keeping you and me off that land. That's right. And that's the reason I'm talking about rights. I've said before in conferences that many of us are on this treadmill of life. What I mean by that is that we're walking straight forward. We're usually looking at a monitor right in front of us. We don't care what's on the left, what's on the right, or what's behind, but we're looking straight ahead. And let's refer that to life in general. We're trying to make the house payment. We're trying to keep food on the table, keep our family fed. We don't have time for all this peripheral stuff. And that's what our government counts on. That's the reason they can violate these rights, because nobody really cares. And that's what's disgusting. That's what disgusts me. And if we aren't breaking laws and we aren't promoting lawlessness, why should they violate our rights? And that brings me to the point of why I walked you in this circle. Should you or me have a right to film in our national parks? Anything we want. If we want to film the amount of garbage left at campsites, we should be able to film that. If we want to film the amount of crime in national parks, we should be able to film that. But that's not happening. How about if we want to tell you about the number of missing people that are in our national parks? Shouldn't I have a right to do that? Wouldn't you like to know? Would you like to know the unusual nature that these people have disappeared? For the followers of Missing 411 and the Canine Missing Project, you know I'm not lying when I write my reports. You know I'm telling the truth. I don't fabricate, and I don't hypothesize about what's happening. You get straight facts out of me. That's why it's hard to really get angry about what I'm doing, unless I'm saying something that's really bothering our government and the National Park Service. So let's get back to this. Should I have a right to film in national parks and tell you the stories about missing people? I think I should. I think that's a First Amendment right. It's called freedom of speech. As a filmmaker, I have a right to tell you what's happening through my art, through film. Now, if the Park Service says no to me, what's to stop them from telling the next person no? Nothing. Who should make the decisions about who's filming in a national park? Should it be arbitrary and capricious? Should they have set rules? Folks, the rule should be anybody can film in the national park for any reason they want, at any time they want, if it doesn't cause disruption, lawlessness, or if they're not breaking a law. And tell me why that shouldn't be the rule. Because I don't understand. Now, why am I on this rant? Pretty easy to understand. Earlier this year, in fact, last year, we started to set a schedule for filming our next movie. And it had to do with a series of disappearances in national parks. We're going to focus on that. And in some national parks, you have to make your reservations if you're going to stay there a year in advance, which we did. And then we started to file the film applications. I know about film applications in national parks because we filled them out before. We filled them out when we filmed at Crater Lake National Park in our first movie titled Missing 411, which you can watch right now on Amazon Prime. So, in that application, they ask intense questions. Who do you represent? Why do you want to film here? How long you're going to film? How much of a disruption are you going to cause? You have to have liability insurance, which costs us thousands of dollars. We got it. And then in that application, you have to lay out a timeline, where you're going to film, why you need to film there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, laid it all out. Processed, laid the application in, didn't hear anything for months. Kept sending him emails, nothing, nothing, nothing. So we start to get within this tight time frame of I either have to cancel the reservations or I lose them and I still have to pay thousands of dollars for the reservations. And they're not communicating. Have their phone number? They're not phoning. Finally, I get somebody to pick up the phone and they say, "Oh, we never got your application." Really? I send it via express mail, overnight delivery by the U.S. Postal Service with signature required. I tell them the signature and they go, "Oh yeah, that's our mailroom employee, but he never forwarded the mail to us. We never got that." I send another overnight package with another check, another everything. I don't hear anything for weeks. Again, very frustrating. I think it was all calculated, and I think it was designed from the very beginning that we would never get into Yosemite. Now, I had met with a family that lost part of their family at Yosemite. And that was part of what this filming was going to be about. Then there was also the case of Stacy Harris, who disappeared almost 40 years ago when her dad and her rode in on a commercial trip, scheduled licensed trip, licensed by Yosemite to go into an area called Tenaya Lakes. Stacy and her dad went in there. She changed clothes. She was 14 years old. She goes, "Hey, I'm going to walk with this man. He's about 80 years old. Out to this point right here, we're going to sit down. I'm going to take pictures." Dad says, "Fine." Stacy gets there and tells the older man, "Hey, I'm going to walk down to that lake and take pictures. I'll be back in a few minutes." Everyone sees the man stay there. He never moves. And Stacy goes down to the lake, disappears, never seen again. A search finds the lens cap to her camera right inside a tree line. That's it. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request against the National Park Service Police for that exact report. And I get a call from an agent named Stephen YU. And right off the bat, he goes, "Why do you want this report?" I thought, wow, strange way to start a conversation with someone else who's in law enforcement. I said, "Well, Stephen, I'm just doing some research." And he says, "You're never getting that case." He was rude. He was curt. And it was actually a very shocking conversation. I even asked him, "Why are you being rude to me?" "Hey, just get it through your head," he says, "you're not getting this report." So I started to, I was as polite as I could be. And I said, "Has anyone looked at this report in 30 years? He said, "Probably not." I said, "Is there any criminal involvement in this case, or is it a straight missing person?" He says, "Straight missing person." I said, "If it's a straight missing person case, nobody's looked at it in 30 years, and there's no criminal involvement, why don't you let me see it? It's none of your business, you're not seeing it." In all my years in law enforcement, in all my years doing these, I've never had anybody talk to me like that, and I've never had anyone be so obstruction related as he was. Since that time, I've met many other special agents, some that have been retired. One special agent wrote a book, and he described Yosemite as the Yosemite Mafia. The management in there, he claimed, was abusive of employees' rights. He just wrote a scathing book about Yosemite and what goes on there. And everyone I've talked to in the Park Service has said Yosemite's different than every other park. It's like the most pristine location to be at, but they also manage their park different than every other site. They kind of do whatever they want to do, apparently. So when we filled out the film application this time, we put in that we wanted to take that trip into Tenaya Lakes and film. And I specifically stated it would just be me and one cameraman. That's it, carrying a very small Panasonic GH4, one of the smallest 4K cameras you can get. No one would even know we were filming there. We could go in there and film now without the permit. No one would even know we were doing something commercial. We would be just like any other person taking that trip. No impact on the environment at all. But we got denied. Was Dave upset? Highly. And I wasn't upset as much about the denial as I was about the way they handled it. If you go to my website, canammissing.com, under current events, I have a copy of this letter posted there. And I want everyone to listen carefully to what the Park Service told me after I called, emailed, and tried to get a hold of them umpteen dozen times, and they refused. I got nothing. They wouldn't say anything. Now, it says, the letter, dated April 28th. Dear Mr. Paulides, I can tell you that what we have been doing the last month, managing the park emergency closure and the staff stay-at-home orders due to COVID-19. Your novelty film project was not a priority of the National Park Service. Let me read that to you again. Your novelty film project was not a priority of the National Park Service. I believe our website indicates there's a 30-day process on film applications. Now, the following is in bold letters. I also inform you filming permits are a privilege granted entirely at the discretion of the superintendent and park management and not a right. Let's be clear on that. End of quotes. What a thing to say to a member of the public who's been ultra polite and just trying to get a permit to film there. Back to the letter. We'll review a revised filming location request based on your application with no staff interviews and get back to you on any revisions we require. I requested to interview certain members of the Park Service there about certain cases. They said, no, you're not going to interview anybody. We'll need to review the revised filming proposal. We cannot commit to any dates at this time as the park remains closed. How the phased reopening for public health will be managed and what those dates are, we do not know. Unless you are flexible and work according to our schedule, I strongly suggest you look elsewhere to film. Joe Llewellyn, Chief Land Resources and Special Park Uses. I read this one section about 10 times. I'll also inform you, filming permits are a privilege granted entirely at the discretion of the superintendent and park management and not a right. Let's be clear on that. Friends, that is complete garbage. How can they be the gatekeeper to our land about me filming about somebody who's missing? What does that tell you about what they say about families and their need to understand what's happening here? Don't you think the families of the missing want me to tell their story? Everyone does. So, it's not a right to film in our parks? Why not? It's our land. What about my First Amendment right as a filmmaker? Aren't they treading on that right now? There's been a lot of films filmed in Yosemite where they break a lot of rules. There's one famous one about a climber where they had drones filming that guy all the way up his climb, yet no drones are supposed to be allowed in Yosemite. I know special agents who say they can't use drones on searches in national parks unless they get okay from Washington, D.C., but apparently Yosemite approved that. I seriously need the assistance of a big law firm to really smack the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior, because they're smacking you and me down right now, and they're not going to allow us to go in and film. Now, after I got this letter, thought about it for a day, had to cool down, and then I sent them this polite letter. Dear Land Use Permit, why not approve the permit without the wilderness area approval? Why not call us and ask us about our specific intent and see if we'd still be interested without the wilderness approval? By not communicating with us for the last month, keeping us completely in the dark, and then issuing a blanket denial, you have greatly inhibited our ability to work with you cohesively. We could be at the point of approval on this permit if you would just communicate. Can you please approve the permit without the wilderness area use and without forcing us to go through the entire permit process again? Of course they didn't get back to me. And why? Because he reiterated in that first email that it's a 30-day approval. By the time I get back to him with everything, we're outside the scope and my reservations are no good. And they wanted another amount of money on another film permit on a fresh application. It's all about the money, probably. If I appear to you to be a little fired up right now, it's because I'm real fired up. I take my job seriously because I want to be your reporter of factual material coming out of our national parks. And right now, that is ending because they won't let me do it. Now, I've had a lot of national park employees over the years get a hold of me, and I thank each one of you for that contact. Great people. You know I'd never, ever give it up. This all started by 2 national park rangers telling me about disappearances in the park. I'd never give up their names. But I let a couple of them have copies of this before I went public with it. And I said, hey, what's your opinion? And they said, hey, Mr. Llewellyn did not write that letter without getting approval from high up the chain of command in Yosemite, because if they hadn't gotten approval for that verbiage, he probably would have been fired. So I realized Joe was just a mouthpiece for probably the superintendent or somebody else up the chain, which even makes it more uncomfortable that this is being allowed. So, I'm sorry for the rant, but I really need a law firm, a big one, to take on the National Park Service over this First Amendment right. And there are cases where the National Park Service has been taken on just about this issue and their permit fee. Somebody was caught, a commercial application was caught filming on the East Coast without a film permit, and they charged him criminally and civilly. Criminally. Yes, they had the gall. So that person sued him in federal court, They dropped the criminal and they kept going with the civil. I don't know what happened because there's no more info about it, but they have a habit of doing this. They give this distinct feeling that it's their property, not ours. And they'll do with it what they want, not what we think is right. So if there's a congressman or a senator out there that's a member of your family, make them aware of this. Glad to work with them on it as well. Love to do a congressional hearing about this and let all the congressmen know how the National Park Service is treating their paying customers, because I go in there a lot. So, going on to something else. This is a letter. And at the beginning, for the first couple paragraphs, you're going to go, hey, Dave, why are you reading this? Be patient, you're going to see. Dave, this is likely way out there, but my sense is you are not necessarily put off by being way out there. I built my retirement house and am building a food forest instead of traditional landscaping. I'm new to gardening and not being particularly encumbered with any knowledge, I researched YouTube along the way. In researching ways to plant fruit trees, I ran across references to a lady considered by the Seventh-day Adventists to have had prophetic abilities. She was one of their church founders back in the 1800s. At any rate, she claimed to have had a dream or a vision in which God revealed to her a special way to grow trees. Basically, you dig a hole 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. In the bottom, you put an upside-down bucket, fill the hole 1/3 full with amended soil. On top of that bottom third, you put a layer of stones, just a single layer. Then you fill the next 1/3 with soil you removed from the first hole you dug. Then again, amended soil in the tree. Under the tree's root ball, you place a large stone and finishing packing soil around the base of the tree. What poked my mind where it itches is that the purposes of the layer stones is not for drainage. That's what I would have expected. However, it is instead for electrical currents that somehow are affected by the stones and benefit the tree's growth. The lady was named Ellen White. You can Google the Ellen White tree planting method and find tons of info on how-tos. My purpose in pestering you with my pondering is you pointing out boulder fields as significant. I wonder if there is involved electrical currents that is similar to the layer of stones in the tree method. People who have planted according to your instructions report amazing results. So who knows? Keep up the good work. I have my theories, but I won't bore you with that. We watch you. We support you. Houston, Texas. I found that fascinating because I actually know a few people that have used that stone method, and it does work really, really well. So consider it. Maybe try it and get back to me. Another letter. Please allow me to preface this with a note that I truly believe goes straight to the heart of the matter. This is kind of a letter that applies to the National Park Service, what I just read to you. So here we go. The quote, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." H.P. Lovecraft. I love Lovecraft. I've quoted him in many of my conferences. The letter writer goes on, "The Park Service will not yield info on lists they keep or intelligence they have with regard to missing people because they just don't know." He's being facetious. The time frame to claim plausible deniability with regard to these happenings is long since passed. As such, it becomes about political expediency. I agree it's absolutely odious to place that above human suffering, but as a former soldier, if there's one thing I do know, appeasing one's superiors is paramount at the federal level. Consider, should they come out and make a statement, "We have been monitoring persons disappearing under circumstances we cannot understand, nor do we know what is responsible," end of quotes. What would be the outcome, particularly in Washington, D.C., if the government actually said that? Now, I've stated many times that our government won't acknowledge what they can't explain and they can't control. Think about that. It's kind of what this man's saying. He goes on, "Therefore, command decisions are always utilitarian in nature." Now here comes a researcher journalist with impeccable bona fides and beyond reproach who begins digging at a sensitive spot, authors a series of books and movies, and creates a sensation. To complicate the matter further, you have the cooperation, or at the very least the implicit support, of victims' families and search and rescue personnel. You are a threat. With regard to the FBI, it's simply stovepipe chain of command No sharing of info between agencies, ergo the Park Service. The FBI know what they know, parks know what they know, and never the two shall meet officially. You see this amongst police organizations and jurisdictional disputes. Think about it. I've read all your books and I've seen this. The FBI agents interacting with Park Service personnel. Have you ever heard of that or people witnessing it? My instinct tells me they are watching to see what progress you make. County sheriffs have the authority to tell the feds to leave. Not sure how that applies on federal park land. I do not recall local police agencies being approached by the feds, excluding evidentiary recovery teams. Furthermore, I spend much of my free time as possible on Mount Seymour Mystery Lake being a favorite, but spending time around Elsay, E-L-S-A-Y Lake, and deep backcountry that are my favorite. Should you ever find yourself this way, I'd be happy to show you the trails. I've also met a gentleman who grew up on the mountain and still believes there are, let me quote that, who also grew up on the mountain and still believes there, works for the family that owns resort, and has been trailblazing deep back over there for 45 years. He is reticent to reveal what he thinks and what he knows regarding disappearances in the area, but he knows better than anyone. I'll cultivate the level of trust required. I'll be sure to get back to you with this. Thank you for all you do. God bless. Mount Seymour is in British Columbia, and it is a location that has many disappearances that I've written about. And the map that goes with that book, Missing 411 Canada, shows that southern British Columbia area, tons of disappearances that match exactly what we talk about on Missing 411. Now, the last couple of YouTubes I've put up have dealt with girls that have disappeared under unusual conditions involving mammals. Now, to keep that string alive, here we go. And this one's going to blow your mind. And the story is in one of my books, William Dunphy's Daughter, missing September 2nd, 1903, in the hills outside of Ewing, E-W-I-N-G, Montana. Age of disappearance described as an infant. And here's what I put in the book. Ewing is now a ghost town in southern Montana, just 10 miles north of Wyoming. There is one building in the town that has supposedly been renovated by a local park ranger. The scenery around the town is gorgeous. High peaks, big mountains, big valleys. As an interesting side note, as you're driving towards Ewing, there's a turnout at a location called Devil's Canyon, where the entire city of Ewing can be seen. I found a series of articles describing this event, with the first being near the beginning of September 1903. The article states that on approximately September 2nd, 1903, the William Dunphy family was living in the hills above Ewing while Mr. Dunphy was prospecting. According to another article, the Clinton morning on August 23rd, 1903, the infant, this is I'll quote, infant daughter was carried off one afternoon by a wild animal, end of quotes. There was no information on the type of animal that carried the girl, but there was information that there was an extensive search. In the same article quoted above, it described that Dunphy was going after his daughter when she vanished. Quoting, while Dunphy was hunting in the area for the girl in the mountains, he came upon a wolf den which shows signs of being occupied. He waited for a long time and then entered as no wolf came forth. He decided to enter the den and see for himself what was in it. As he entered the place, he heard the cry of a child. Advancing, he saw a sight that almost turned his hair white. Lying on a bed of grass at the end of the den was a big mother wolf with several pups inside. While at her side was his lost baby girl, trying her best to get a supper from the mother wolf. The wolf simply frowned when the man approached and made no attempt to escape or attack. Dunphy got his daughter back. She wasn't injured and was supposedly well nourished. Newspapers in Red Lodge, Montana had the story validated by two other residents of Ewing. There was never any other clarity as to the size of the wolf or other specific details of the recovery. In summary, I've written about other girls that were supposedly taken by something that was described as a large wolf or bear. This is the first article I've ever found where an adult got close enough to view the abductor. Absolutely perfect. Just in case you are not aware, news articles in the late 1800s and 1900s usually did not include children's names in the articles. They described their children by their association to the parent. The fact that Dunphy's daughter's name wasn't in the article was not strange. I view the location of this incident as unique and important. Ewing is a remote city. The Dunphys lived in the hills outside the city, extremely remote. In Missing 411 Western U.S., I wrote about other incidents involving children taken in Montana by mammals described as wolves or bears. Now, friend of mine, Steve Isdall, has a site called How to Hunt, and it's a great channel. Tells some great stories. But on a personal note, he and I know each other, and we've talked a lot, and he has a lot of wolves up in southern British Columbia. He says, Dave, these wolves are not like dogs. They're huge. And I've had the same thing told to me by people here in Montana. I've seen a lot of bears, never seen a wolf. Most people won't see wolves. They're pretty much keep their distance from humans. But the wolves are big. So when I hear about this story, and I hear about a wolf taking care of a little baby girl, my mind starts to spin like, what the heck is happening here? But as Mr. Dunphy stated, it was a wolf. So in other cases, there might have been some ambiguity. Not here. I tend to believe it was a wolf. Now, one more story for you that should boggle your mind. It's in Missing 411 Eastern U.S., and it's a Pennsylvania case. And during the 1950s, there were a lot of kids taken in Pennsylvania. This happened in Pleasantville in the 1950s. Age of disappearance, 2 years. Named Jackie Copeland. Jackie has this is straight out of my book. Jackie, his 3 sisters and parents went to a picnic at an oil company's property outside of Pleasantville. The family was socializing with others when Jackie's 7-year-old sister told their father that Jackie was missing. The family started to look for the boy and could not locate him. It was at this point that everyone in the picnic started to participate in the search. In a very short period of time, the state police had arrived and they called for a team of bloodhounds. The oil company called for additional volunteer searchers until there were hundreds of people looking for the boy. It was evident by late in the evening that the bloodhounds could not pick up a scent or refused to search, and ground searchers were not having any luck finding the boy. At 8 the following morning of Jackie's disappearance, a man named Bevier, B-E-V-I-E-R, was searching outside the main area where an oil repressuring plant was located. The area is completely surrounded with what many newspapers called impassable swamps. As Mr. Bevier and a crew of searchers were walking through the swamps, he accidentally saw Jackie looking around the side of a tree, almost peering. Bevier called his name and Jackie answered. Jackie was found 2 miles from the picnic and across swamps that were deemed impassable by search coordinators. Stop here for a second. I've stated before many times, swamps and bogs are related to these disappearances. Back to the story. Jackie was transported to a hospital where he was met by his family. After being examined by doctors, they stated that the boy had a few scratches, but he was in good health. An article in the Logansport Press dated May 17, 1950, had an interview with the Copelands and heard Jackie's rendition of what occurred during his night in the woods. The press wanted to hear how the boy got to his location in the swamp and what he had to eat or drink and how he kept warm. Jackie first was asked why he left the picnic, and here is the quote. He saw something peering at him from behind a big tree. When he approached, the creature scampered into the brush. Jackie didn't explain anything more about leaving the picnic at that point. The article later explained more about what Jackie stated, quoting, recounted in child talk his adventure in an awful blackness peopled by a great throbbing giant and a tall friendly tree and wild animals howling in the distance and the unfamiliar shouts of strangers prowling nearby. It's a lot to take in, folks. And when I read that, I was stunned. Jackie Copeland's explanation of what occurred to him could be a very sobering narrative of what might possibly be occurring with a plethora of missing people outlined in this book. Jackie had gone through a very frightening experience, and the safety of his parents' presence, he was able to recount certain elements of what happened. He did say that he believed he slept through the entire night in the woods. How Jackie was able to sleep under condition he described as a true mystery, but many young children are found by searchers in a groggy, semi-unconscious state. The questions I posed to each and every reader was, what was the creature peering at him from behind the tree? I think it's ironic that Jackie mimicked the behavior of the creature when he was approached by a searcher. How could a 2-year-old boy traverse impassable swamps without the aid of some type of mammal? I know that many people would discount Jackie's explanation and say it was a fantasy. The location where Jackie was found was not fantasy. The description Jackie gave us of his incident is something that we should all ponder and attempt to understand. So there you have it. another very strange story involving a very young child. I don't know what to make of it, and probably the best person at that time to truly kind of decipher what Jackie meant by all this and how big his language was at the time for a 2-year-old would probably have been his parents. But for us to sit here and Monday night quarterback what he meant, it's like $1 million question. So anyhow, I covered a lot of things in this video. I'm sorry I got on my podium and went after it, but I really, really need you to get on board with me about this First Amendment issue in our national parks. Please, please, this is one video that needs to go public hard. The public needs to understand that the frontline ranger in those parks that we meet day in and day out are great, great people. And they're doing a great job every day, and they know I support them. It's not them that this is about. It's about Upper Park management that has lost their mind. I think the world needs to know this. Thank you very much for your support. I can't tell you enough how much it all means to me that I've gathered an audience like you, and your supportive words in the comments section mean a great deal to me. So have a great week, and I'll see you soon.